Now the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Garrity.
And welcome, everyone, to the Tuesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Garrity of National Review, also author of The Weed Agency. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Good, bad, crazy martinis for you as usual. And we start with the good, which for those of us who enjoy the rule of law and a little delicious irony at the same time, we're appreciative of this. This is the CNN version of this story. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and undocumented immigrant Jose Antonio Vargas was detained at a Texas airport Tuesday morning, his spokesman said. He was held at a detention center at the airport in McAllen, Texas, after he tried to fly out of the border city. Information on why he was detained was not immediately available. For those who have not followed the immigration debate closely, Vargas has for many years now, and through the Washington Post most notably, championed and trumped the fact that he's an illegal immigrant and paraded that around at a lot of different times and made it part of his activism through his writing. And Jim, for him to actually get detained now on the fact that he's not in this country legally makes a lot of people pretty satisfied.
Yeah, this is a controversial good martini, but let me just observe something. So here's a guy, spends the first 12 years of his life living in the Philippines, comes to the United States to join his family when he's 12, and believed that he was being brought over here legally. I guess he was on some sort of visiting visa, and at age 16, he goes to get a driver's license. And he finds out that the identity documents that his family had given him are fraudulent. He keeps his status secret, pursues an education, goes to San Francisco State University, goes on to have a fairly distinguished career in journalism, covering the Virginia Tech shootings and things like that. And then, of course, kind of comes out, so to speak, and says, "Look, I'm in this country illegally," and has been covering the immigration debate since. And he had this documentary with a very clearly pro-amnesty, pro-legalization for those here illegally documentary that CNN has run. We can sympathize with Mr. Vargas. It must be really tough to find out you're not in the country legally and that you're a legal resident of a country you haven't lived in decades. Having said that, he's basically saying, well, the law shouldn't apply to me. And he's not entitled to do that. And what's more, I've been very curious. He has a Philippine passport to get onto airplanes and stuff, but he does not have a valid driver's license. And he has been arrested in the past for not having a legal driver's license. He has been cited for this, not jailed for it or any other serious consequence for this. And I'm just kind of left baffled by this attitude of Greg, you have a valid driver's license, correct?
Yes.
I do. If you're driving a car, you have to have a valid driver's license. That's not something that's negotiable or merely a suggestion. That is the law. And for several years now, I don't know whether he actually drove on this trip to Texas or what the circumstance was. I do know that as of recently as 2012, he'd been busted for driving without a license. He's now turned into this cause celeb. There are lots of folks in the media who's seen there's something really unjust about him being arrested. Look, he's in the country illegally. And there's a second argument that says, look, if you're going to be in the country illegally, how many countries could you write about and say, I am in your country illegally, and not expect the cops to come looking for you? Could you try that in Russia? Could you try that in China? I'm not even sure a bunch of European countries would be, hunky-dory with that stuff. So a baffling set of circumstances here. Pretty much the widespread reaction on Twitter has been a sense of this has now become a crisis because a reporter's been arrested. Nothing like that to get reporters interested in this story. It's going to be really fascinating to see how the public reacts to this and whether there's this, we should ignore the law. The other intriguing thing I've seen mentioned in the last couple of moments on Twitter, Greg, is what if the president pardons him? This is a way for him to get warm, fuzzy feelings from his base, the folks who want to see amnesty. It'd be a one-person amnesty of sort. The more I think about it, the more likely it is that we're going to see a serious pressure on the president to unilaterally take action because he's got his phone, he's got his pen, to say that this guy the law doesn't apply to this guy. And I think one of the things that's most irritating about this, as much as we may kind of sympathize with the difficult circumstances in which he learned that he's not a U.S. citizen, I don't know if he's ever began the process of attempting to become a U.S. citizen. He lives in the United States, he works in the United States, he's here illegally, and he has not taken any step to become legalized. I think he basically thinks that he has enough of anything to change, the law has to change. And people are more than a wee bit irked about that. So, as my colleague Charlie Cook just pointed out, Vargas's explicit position basically can be summarized as the rule of law is outrageous.
That's pretty much been the premise of his reporting on this issue over the years, that's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, because one of them is, I'm an American, I just don't have the papers. You can be an American in attitude, American in spirit. I'm sure he's a swell guy, but he's not in the country legally. And you can't just say, well, I don't like that law, so I'm not going to enforce it. It should go away. You want to change the law, change the law. A lot of us would argue this law has been on the books and unenforced for a really long time. So anyway, we should move on to our next martini, Greg. But as you can tell, this is something I'm quite irked by, because this is a guy who's kind of been openly, like, Jazz Shaw of Hot Air had written, like, look, dear INS, dear ICE, I found one. He's doing documentaries for CNN. He's reporting. They shouldn't be that hard to find. Get that guy. Start with the easy cases, then you can work towards deporting the rest of them. And I think Mr. Vargas really did flaunt his status just a little too much to not expect any consequence.
All right, on to the bad martini now. This is courtesy of Fox News. The Pentagon laying off thousands of military officers, including those serving or who have recently served in Afghanistan. Defense Department officials said the reductions are the result of mandatory spending cuts imposed by sequestration and are part of their larger plan to reduce the number of U.S. soldiers from 520,000 to 450,000. Roughly 2,600 captains and other officers have or will be laid off, with more expected. And then the analyst here says, well, the Pentagon made a similar move after the Vietnam War. So, Jim, from a conservative perspective, probably a few frustrations here. Number one, that the military seems to be the only one feeling the pinch of sequestration at this point. You can probably blame both parties for that. And secondly, this war's not over.
Yeah, I mean, like, does it feel like the world is getting calmer and more easygoing and at peace, from Eastern Europe, the South China Sea, to our southern border, to the whole Middle East, North Africa, Pakistan, Iraq, Afghanistan, hey, we don't need as many troops, you can lay off troops, but my guess is at some point in the not too distant future, you're going to need them back again.
All right, speaking of the Obama administration, on to the crazy martini now. And it was pretty early on in his administration when President Obama was asked about American exceptionalism, and he said, yeah, we're exceptional, but, so are the Greeks and so are the Turks and so are, I'm sure other countries think they're exceptional too. John Kerry was speaking in Vienna, Austria recently, and was speaking to the officials that work at the embassy there. And here's part of what he said. He was talking about the fact that he spoke to the graduating class at Yale this year. He says, quote, and I talked to them about the sort of world we're in right now, but at the end I tried to remind them all, which I remind you of, I always get a little uptight when I hear politicians say how exceptional we are, not because we're not exceptional, but because it's kind of in your face and a lot of other people are exceptional. A lot of other places do exceptional things. And Jim, it's obvious that a growing number of people don't get this concept, but it's especially disheartening when it's the people at the highest echelons of government. Greg,
I can't believe we didn't elect this guy. Well, we're exceptional, but let's not be in your face about it, okay, Greg? We need to be polite about it and genteel in our, I'm exceptional, but really, all of America should not be. First of all, it's really kind of intriguing because, like, exceptional is not necessarily a synonym for special. Because then you turn into Dana Carvey, the church lady. Well, isn't that special? When we think about American exceptionalism, I think, at least as I've always thought of it being defined, and I guess maybe I'm thinking about it very differently, is that America has a really unique role to play in the world. We are the arsenal democracy. We are the lead. We've called ourselves the leader of the free world for a really long time. If America doesn't do it, it doesn't get done in a lot of cases. And there are other wonderful places in the world, other wonderful countries. We have many friends and allies. It's not, when we call ourselves the exceptional country or talk about American it's not to say, hey, we're better than everybody else. It's more like we have a role that nobody else is in a position to play. And I don't see anybody being in a position to play this role for at least a generation. India's got some good stuff going on. But otherwise, most of our countries we traditionally do. Australia, they're great allies. But, nobody is set to be patrolling the seas around the world, for example, the role that our Navy plays. Traditionally, when some, horrific dictator was threatening borders and threatening world trouble, we were the ones who did it, stepped in. We have our record in world wars. We kind of set up this role in that, look, we have many allies, we have NATO, we have a lot of great groups, a lot of other great countries, but we have to take the leadership position because history has taught us nobody else is willing to step up and do that. Now we have an administration that boldly talks about leading from behind. And now, of course, we threatened that Assad must go, and now we're he doesn't. Not only does he not go, now we're talking maybe he's got to stay, and we've turned into this indescribable mush of a policy, and that's and now John Kerry gets to settle the diplomacy and stuff. When politicians say how exceptional we are, it's kind of in your face. Well, so what? Oh, we might offend somebody overseas. Look, I think it was Dennis Miller who said, we are the most beloved and hated, respected and feared nation in the entire world. We are Frank Sinatra. And it's just the way it's always going to be until we become a smaller country or a less prosperous country or a less militarily powerful country. Actually, come to think of it, maybe we're heading in this direction. Because traditionally, to be a world power, traditionally you had to control your borders, and I guess we're giving up on that effort these days. But this is who we are, and it's really intriguing to hear John Kerry say that he gets a little uncomfortable. Quote, I get a little uptight when he hears people doing that, because it's somehow we're by asserting our exceptionalism, we're somehow hurting the feelings of other countries.
So John Kerry's uncomfortable with that, but other people are not, including people who aren't even Americans, talking about American exceptionalism. One of those people is Bono, the lead singer of U2 and a human rights activist. If you saw the Dinesh D'Souza movie America, you saw a lot of this clip. But here was Bono at Georgetown a number of years ago talking about what makes America exceptional.
Because America's an idea, isn't it? I mean, Ireland's a great country, but it's not an idea. Great Britain's a great country. It's not an idea. That's how we see you around the world, as one of the greatest ideas in human history, right up there with the Renaissance, right up there with crop rotation and the Beatles' White Album. The idea, the American idea, it's an idea. The idea is that you and me are created equal. It will ensure that an economic recession need not become an equality recession. The idea that life is not meant to be endured but enjoyed. The idea that if we have dignity, if we have justice, then leave it to us. We'll do the rest.
Jim, I don't think there's any reason to ever be embarrassed about that.
That was great, and not just because he's putting that in the Beatles' White Album in the class. Right, we're right up there with the Renaissance. So yeah, that's actually a really great summary of it. And I wish I could broadcast that around the world, and I hope people recognize that, because what he's saying is true. Or at least we can say America used to be an idea. I hope we're all unified behind that idea, because it feels like it's changing before our eyes. So anyway, happy Tuesday, everybody.
On that optimistic note, Jim, have a great day. Talk to you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Columbus of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today, and be sure to join us again on Wednesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.